So today we're going to go over how to squat properly, and that's a little bit of a misnomer. Where there's no real 100% proper way to squat. So we're going to actually go over mainly squat basics and see how that goes, and teach you kind of the basics of how to squat. So again, these sessions are some learning, more exercising. Today it might be a little bit more learning. We're not going to do too much exercising. It's going to be just learning more about how to squat properly so you can do that on your own. So again, the goal is to teach you why and then show you how. Okay, so for this you're going to need, again, yoga mat is optional. It's easier for your feet, but a stick is definitely something you're going to need. Okay, and so the squat is both an exercise and a functional skill required for many things. So if you see on the bottom here, we have someone gardening. So she's doing pretty much a deep squat when she's gardening. It's quite a functional exercise. This plumber seems a little too happy for what he's doing right now, but getting down into like doing household chores, you're going to need to do a squat. That's kind of like a modified squat, like a staggered squat. Going to the toilet is another squatting motion you need to kind of do. So everyone in a day-to-day basis needs to know kind of how to squat. And for people who play sports, you see a baseball player, all three of those guys, the back catcher, the ump, and the batter, are all in a squatted position. So it's a really functional thing you need to do. And with squatting, you're going to have to, based on the demand and the load you put on your body. So demand being either like reps, how many reps you do, how many times you do it. Load being how much like weight you put on your shoulders or how much you carry. Squats can be done in all sorts of different ways. Okay, so what we want to go through is this pyramid. It's called the performance pyramid, and I've kind of listed a bunch of the squatting motions in terms of their difficulty up this pyramid. So if you think of this pyramid, the higher level is being harder and the lower levels being easier. The higher you climb up and the more advanced squatting stuff you do, the more functional movement, performance metrics, performance skills you need to be able to actually achieve that. So for people like us, general people who garden, need to do household chores, you need a certain functional movement to do those things, but you can do it a variety of different ways because the demand is low. So like your back can be rounded. It doesn't really matter unless you put more and more load. So if you want to like do gardening for 3-4 hours, then you're going to maybe need to change your mechanics a little bit. But if you're doing it for just a short little while, the mechanics don't really matter. You can squat in all different types of ways. I just want to emphasize that. It's like, I don't want people coming out of this thinking that I absolutely need to be rigid and like do all these things to squat. It's not the case. Like you can do squats in all different types of ways. It's just as you push higher, like you carry load, like the two people up top on their back or over their head, you're going to need to squat a certain way to be safe. So what happens is, like for some people, this functional movement, so I'm going to go to the next slide here, this functional movement of mobility, stability, and control, this area gets very narrow. So it gets very small. So if they lack some mobility or stability or control, say this level of the pyramid gets like this big versus your strength and power is a bit bigger in terms of like what you can do, then the pyramid gets a little bit unbalanced, and the higher you push, the more precarious you put your body under. So you just want to be careful with injury in that case. So as the higher your level you go, say if you want to squat for like this guy, if you want to squat like 300 pounds, let's say, it's a lot of weight. If you don't have certain mobility and stability control in this layer, the foundational layer, to do that, you're gonna eventually hurt yourself. And you do want as much functional movement as possible on the base, and then building power, strength, endurance, all the performance metrics on top of that. And then you got skills like actually how to do like a back squat, how to do a clean and jerk, how to do certain things. Those things build on top of it. And don't get me wrong, like these aren't like mutually exclusive. Like they don't stack up onto your shot. Like you got to do bottom layer, top layer, next layer, then the top layer. You can work on all these at once. It's just the higher up you go, the bigger the base needs to be. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what we want to do then, as a load and demand on the squat increases, learning more of the functional movements, performance, and skills is necessary to squat optimally. And we're going to go over 4 things to learn how to squat optimally today. So these 4 things are pelvic control, hip hinging, your knee alignment, and your ankle mobility. Those 4 things I've kind of keyed into kind of things that you need to do for, or need to know how to learn how to do, or learn how to control for squatting well. And there's an asterisk because these things can be affected by previous injury, genetics, structural changes. So if you've had surgeries in your hips or your knees, ankles, if you fractured something in your ankle or sprained your ankle, these things can all be affected. So not everyone can squat in the most optimal way. And sometimes it's genetics. Like sometimes you have long femurs, long legs, or short torsos, long torsos. So these things all play into kind of how well you squat. But there are some hallmark things you need to be able to do, and these 4 are those things. So we're going to go over each one. So pelvic control. So we have a picture of a bucket here, and the bucket has water. So right now it's flat, and you can store water there flat. But what happens is we're going to imagine our pelvic bones. So I also say like the belt line being the bucket. And when you tip, so say you're facing that way, if you tilt the bucket forward and you're pouring water forward, that's called an anterior tilt. And if you tilt the bucket backwards, that's called a posterior pelvic tilt. So that's kind of the nomenclature we're going to go with. So here's a picture. So that's me. And the one right in the middle, I would say would be called neutral spine or neutral pelvic alignment. And then if you can sort of tell, my shirt's kind of covering it a little bit, but if the picture on the left, as it's a bit tilted forward, so that's called an anterior pelvic tilt. And the picture on the right, where my back's a little bit more rounded, that's called a posterior pelvic tilt. So these are positions where you're looking at kind of in through here and the belt line. So this belt line is going backwards and this belt line is going forward. Basically, the more heavy you squat, the more you want to be playing around in this region, the more neutral spine. Being in here, if you're bearing a lot of weight on your shoulders, you're going to put a lot of pressure on your discs. And here, you're going to put a lot of pressure on your spinal joints. Okay, so that's neutral spine. So we're going to go over later kind of how to move and try to figure out where this is. Okay, that's pelvic control. And then the hip hinging. So our hips are, we can hinge the hips kind of like this door hinge there. And what you want to do, and that's me again. So we're talked about neutral spine or neutral pelvic alignment. What we're going to do is try to hinge and keep that neutral alignment as we hinge. So what some people do is they bend through their low back and not through their hips. So our hips are actually lower, like around here. So if you draw a straight line with a club or with a stick, this should be straight and then this should be straight. So we're hinging around our hips. So that's the number one thing we want to do when we start a squat, is to hinge the hips. If we don't and start bending the knees, we put a lot more pressure on the knees, or if you round the back, you put more pressure on the back. So hinging here just primes your body to put more weight into the glutes, get those glutes more active. Okay, so that's what we're going to do later. And then, oh yes, so sorry, this picture is just to show you kind of if you are lacking the pelvic control as you hinge. You see people in the gym a lot of the times, they actually do this. They are arching their back, so their back gets super tight, super sore after squatting. If you can maintain more of a neutral spine here, you're going to put more pressure on the glutes and put less pressure on the back. And then some people, they don't know how to go into these positions, so they put a lot of pressure and they round their back right away. So those just 3 different types of ways people squat. And then for knee alignment, what we're going to look at, knee is also a hinge joint. So it only kind of goes one way. It has a little bit of movement side to side, but mainly it goes up and down. If you're hinging this way with your knee, you definitely need to go to the emergency room. But with the hinging of the hips, or sorry, of the knees or the alignment, what you want to achieve for the knee is if you draw a straight line down towards the toes, you should have it pretty much in alignment. So what happens with people with squatting is when they get too much weight, their knees start coming in towards the inside, and that can put some torque onto the knee. So like if you're drawing, if the legs are going this way, like in this way, that's no good. And if the knees are going out that way, it's no good too. So that's what the main thing of alignment is, just getting your knees right over top of your toes. Another thing you can look for is if you draw a line straight down in this angle here, they should be not too far out from the front of your toes. Like some people say you actually shouldn't cross your toes. Like, sorry for the not straight line there. But some people say that your knees should actually stay behind your toes. That's not 100% necessary. Like back catchers and your knees are always in forward. So you just want your knees to be relatively close. You don't want, like, if you're going to squat heavy, you don't want your knees all the way kind of up through here. You want it more in line with your toes. So that's the basics of knee alignment. It's not rocket science. You just want your toes or your knees aligned with your toes. Okay. And then your ankle. Your ankle is also a bit of a hinge joint. What we want to look at is the way your knee bends. So this is called dorsiflexion. So when you bend your knee forward on it, it's called dorsiflexion. And if you have greater than 10 degrees of dorsiflexion, so your heel isn't lifting up, your heel stays on the ground, and you push your hips forward or your knees forward. If this is greater than 10, you have pretty good ankle mobility and you should be able to squat pretty well, like get into a deep squat. A lot of people, when they go into that deep squat like that, a picture of the gardener, they can't really get into that deep squat because of lack of ankle mobility or lack of ankle dorsiflexion. So testing to see whether you have this can change the way you squat. So if you lack this, you might need to do some stretching, some mobility work to try to get that, so then you don't add more pressure elsewhere when you squat. As a load increases, right? Like as a demand and load increases. If you're just squatting like once or twice, it doesn't really matter, I would say. Okay. And another thing too is watching your the foot kind of the foot arch support. If you're collapsing your arch, that could be a sign that you're trying to achieve more dorsiflexion. If you have flat feet as you go, so that's another thing to watch out for. Okay. So yeah, we're gonna go back. I have a hashtag of ready moves that go over different types of tests that you can do and to test yourself to see whether you have kind of mobility and control and stability that you need for being ready for anything. So you can kind of go through that if you want to. Yeah, just look up that hashtag. But yeah, so we're going to go into the testing portion or the earning portion. So again, just a warning, go at your own pace. We're not doing too many things, so it's not going to be too hard, but respect your limits. Stay within them for today and take breaks if you need to. We're going to go over the deep squat, so how to kind of get into a deep squat. And for those of you who can already, we're going to try an overhead squat. So something over your head, see if you can keep your alignment proper and keep your pelvic control good, and go from there. Okay, so no questions? Any questions there? Did everyone make sense? Yeah? Okay. So we're gonna go and grab your stick from me for and if anyone wants to share their screen, and Rudy can kind of give you some feedback too. You can do that. No pressure, anything. You don't have to share your screen or not. Okay. So let me get set up here. Okay, so I have my golf club, my trusty 60-degree wedge. For those of you who kind of want to find out kind of their pelvic alignment, what you can do is imagine that belt buckle or the bucket, and you're going to just try to tip the bucket forward and then tip the bucket backwards. So forward and back. So just try that a couple times and see how it feels. For some people, it's going to be like shake and bake, or you're going to be like shaky. Your brain hasn't learned how to do these motions, so your brain is trying to figure it out. But for those of you who have the control down, it's going to be relatively easy. For some people, it should be like, what is this? This isn't even an exercise. For other people, it's going to be a bit tougher. Okay, so try that out. So once you've kind of tried it a couple times, you can take your stick, you can put it behind your back. And now what I want you to feel is our back naturally has a bit of a curve. A bit of a curve. So you're going to put one hand right where their low back is, so right about here. Okay? So neutral spine. If you hold the club on the back of your head here, neutral spine should really be, if you can touch the stick with your hand and then touch the back of your back with your, your back with the back of your palm, that should be around neutral spine. So if you take the hand and put it here, your palm should be touching the stick, and then the back of your palm should be touching the back. Okay, so that's kind of neutral spine. So for people who are too far, what you'll notice is if you're arching like this, and you have a big arch, and I put my hand behind my back, I can't touch the club, and that's too much arch. Okay, so that's a thing you want to watch for, is the back of your palm touching your back, and then you being able to touch the stick. Because what comes next is the hip hinging. So as we hinge, what I want you to do is keep that neutral spine as we hinge. That will be important, because if you can't do that, and as you hinge, you start feeling that the gap here is increasing, it means you've lost the neutral spine. Okay, so now do that here, set it up. So now as you kind of set up neutral spine, and then you're going to hinge through this joint, this hip joint. So you're just going to bend forward with your body and shift your weight, shift your bum backwards. Okay, so shift here and hold, and then bring it back. So try that a couple times and let me know or feel that if you're increasing this distance here. Okay, so you want to stay relatively the same distance the whole way through, like your hand touching the stick and their back. So what happens too is if you are rounding your back, so you're doing this, the stick will start leaving here, or you'll feel like you feel more pressure in the back of your palm. That's also something you want to watch out for. Okay, so for those of you who can do it, do this a couple times. Yeah, so for some of you, this should be, again, very easy. For other people, it might be very tough. Okay, so everyone following so far? So those are the first kind of two things that we want to get. Okay, those are the first two things we want to look out for. The next thing is then the knee alignment. So we're gonna go now, again, stick behind your back, find the neutral spine or neutral pelvic alignment, and then you're going to hinge at the hips first. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna hinge and then start bending your knees. So watch for whether you bend in. Some people do that right away. Other people are pretty good. So what you're gonna do is hinge and then bend down. So now what you wanna watch for too is whether this changes or not, okay? Be very cognizant of that. So this stick here is just feedback for whether you leave that alignment or not, okay? So hinge, squat, and just go as low as you can until you feel like you can't go any further without your knees collapsing in or your back is starting to arch, okay? Try that a couple times. Some of you might be very foreign. Like you might lose your balance. This might be a new way for you to squat down. So this kind of way of doing it is the most optimal way. Yep. So from the side, again, hinge first and then start going down and see how far you can get down and then come back up. And down and come back up. So sometimes what people will feel for the fourth thing is a lack of ankle mobility. So what happens is as they go down here, they just get stuck, like can't go any further, and then your knees want to collapse to kind of help you through. But for most people, it should be able to go down, but people with lack of mobility will have trouble going down. So what you can try is see if you raise up your heels and then go down. If you can go down lower with your heels raised versus with heel down, that's probably a sign that you have tight ankles or a lack of ankle mobility. So for people with those, if you put like a layer, like a plate, like a weighted plate or something underneath your heel as you squat, you're going to be able to squat deeper. Okay, that's something that it's like a little bit of a tip that for people who want to squat but can't have lack of ankle mobility, you can put your heel on top of something so you can get a little lower. Okay, so that's the whole kind of process here. Who could have done the whole thing all the way down? Can everyone go all the way down easily, keeping a neutral spine and hinging at the hips? Yeah, having a magazine under the hips is a great idea. Hip pain, yeah. Okay, so if you have hip pain, then just don't go as low. Just go to a little bit of, don't go as deep into the squat. Just stay there and just work from there. So the next couple steps might not apply to you for the person with hip pain. For the next couple of people who were able to do it, we're going to move on a little bit. So for those who couldn't master that deep squat all the way down, just practice that. So spend the rest of the time practicing that. And then for those of you who could achieve everything, we're going to try an overhead squat. Okay? So you're going to take the stick, put it right above your head. So 90 degrees here on both sides. And then you're going to stick the club right above your head. Okay? So right above your head. So it looks like this. Okay? So as you go and lift up your club right away, you're going to keep the neutral spine, hinge, and then start going down and see if you can keep the stick relatively above your head. If you start feeling like you can't do it and your hands go like this, then you need to go a lot forward. There's something going on here and in your shoulders that is lacking mobility or control or stability causing you to do that. Okay, so try that out. Again, up, bend your hips forward a little bit, and then go down as far as you can go. Make sure your knee alignment is good. Make sure you're not collapsing your knees or anything like that. So as you go down, go. See if you can go down all the way. And then back up. So that is Olympic style kind of movement, that clean and press. It's a reason why it's in the Olympics is because it's a very athletic skill that you need to achieve. So if you find that your back starts arching a lot as you're up there, there's ways to kind of work to try to get that alignment so that you're not forcing anything. So that's a good way to squat if you want. If you find that the body weight squat, a deep squat, too easy, you can try the overhead squat. One really good test to see if you can do the overhead squat really well is if you can do this against the wall or facing the wall. So here you're gonna put your hands up here, right against the wall. Your toes don't need to go right up against it, but pretty close. And then trying to go down without touching the wall as you go up. So down and up. So if you can do that, then that's amazing. Okay. So try, if there are those of you who had no problems doing that, or no problems doing the overhead squat without the wall, try it out and let me know. Let me know how it is. I know some of you don't have that much wall space. So if you don't have the wall space, you can try a door, like right in front of the door. So yeah, that's a great little tip. So if you find that squatting, no problems, you have those 4 things you're able to do, then that's great. You're squatting optimally, or the most optimal you can. And then you can start adding weight, adding demand. So holding weights like a goblet squat or sumo squat, kettlebell swings. All those would be pretty good for you to do and build up strength if you have these 4 things. Okay. For those of you who want a little bit more challenge, like want to put a little bit more weight, then you can start doing single leg kind of squats, single leg variations. So I'll teach one. If you have like a couch or a chair, what you can do is you can hold on, you can use a stick as balance, stick out one leg, and then slowly go down. So same principles. You're gonna keep the low back neutral, or the pelvic neutral, hinge at the hips first. So hinge at the hips first, and then go down with one foot and try to keep that alignment, and then come back up. So that's another way to get body weight exercises in the squat. And again, watch your knee alignment. So your knee shouldn't buckle in as you go down. Your knee shouldn't collapse in like this. It should stay relatively on top of the foot, and then come back up. If you want more of a challenge, take the stick away, slowly go down, and then slowly come back up. Okay? So if your knees are collapsing in, it could be a sign that you need some strengthening in your hips or your groin muscles. Okay? Does that make sense for everyone? Everyone following? So good. So there's a variety of different squats you can try. I would say if you master the deep squat is the most functional kind of squat you can do. As a human being, we should be able to kind of deep squat. But A lot of people can, so don't feel bad if you can't. There are a lot of people who can't, so just try to work towards the deep squat. That's not goal number one when you're squatting. And then once you achieve that, you can add other stuff. So you can start adding weight, adding load, doing more reps, putting stuff overhead. Like all those things are good to do once you have these things mastered. And then single leg squats can really kind of challenge your body in one way or the other. Okay. So that's our session today. That's not didn't do a whole lot of exercising, but more teaching. Of course, we do virtual appointments. So if you found these sessions helpful, we can, and you want more guided one-on-one sessions, then we can kind of go one-on-one, and I can break things down for you and help you kind of progress your goals, your physical goals, or help you out of pain. Yeah. So thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed that session. It's not, again, not too much exercising, but I hope you learned something.